Hey there! Today, I'm thrilled to share an exciting thought-provoking video that's going to make waves. Proof: the social contract is finally revealed. If you're into deep dives into society, equality, and the future, this one's for you. Ever wondered about the foundations of our social fabric? Join me as we unravel the intricate layers of the social contract that shapes our world. Let's challenge our perspectives and explore the implications of its termination. To spread the word, let's start a ripple effect together. Share this video, tag a friend who loves intellectual conversations, and use hashtag #SocialContractUnraveled at Equity Exposed to join the movement. Let's ignite a dialogue that has the power to reshape our understanding of society. Before we get into what is the social contract, I would like to explain why I have been showing this information for so many years. Many are using these materials I have brought to the forefront incorrectly, adding their own unique twist based on their beliefs, when history is not interpreted that way. History and law is the facts, what can be proven in writing. This is different than other history, since law must be written. When we research the history of a law from English law, the foundations are written. When you have the complete history to that question, then the interpretation is self-evident. The history of law can only be misinterpreted by not having all the history. Those who are struggling with the meaning of law are signs that the history of that area of law is not known to the speaker. I hope to reduce the number of conspiracy theories when it comes to law, government, property, and money by showing that most are simply not looking back far enough. This information is to strengthen, not to attack, equity or democracy. By learning the history of the system of law, you should be able to see the current era as a system of law is a stepping stone for mankind, one of many steps in history, with many more systems of law to come in the future. The history of the evolution of mankind from individualism to a group led to despotic tyranny. Today, we have a democracy, a soft tyranny that came from despotic times. The history is the realization that the agreement to be a member is not forced. It is perceived as forced and a tyranny because most have no idea what the agreement intends or what type of system the agreement creates. Only knowing what the agreement is creates the ability to choose that agreement and system of law for yourself. The next evolution or revolution will either thrust the planet back to the despotic times of pre-1688 or take us forward closer to a utopia where all mankind knows and agrees to a basic system of law as nature. Yet this also requires everyone to have common sense or knowledge that is the same. I hope showing this information is a step towards that common knowledge that takes mankind forward, using truth versus going backward with conspiracies that are only intended to keep one in the dark, removing the ability of choice. What is the social contract? This question can only be answered and understood by learning the history of the different systems of law before the start of English law. The history of modern law is based on the history of tenure from the year 1066 to 1919. The discussion on the different systems of law and how these other systems functioned are found before the year 1066. To answer the question, what is the social contract? This question is far simpler than the majority believe. The difficulty is in interpretation. Not knowing there are two separate systems of land law within modern law allows one to interpret the words used as applied in property and civil law when the proper category of interpretation falls within the law of tenure. This modern law is called a settlement not subject to a trust. To help shed some light on this important aspect of interpretation using the correct area of law is fully written to be understood easily, that is, if one does not apply the wrong area of law to the interests that are discussed. Property law is equity, dominion, and the fee are considered laws of the land for the members of the English system of common law and equity. I would like to point out that common law is separate from equity. These are two different areas of law. Both common law and equity can only apply to members of that system, making common law and equity for a specific purpose. The purpose of common law and equity is to create a system of ownership for its members, where the laws and rules of ownership and the ability to leave what one has purchased to another as an inheritance. The inheritance is equity and falls within property law and the Statute of Uses 1535. Blackstone has a brilliant quote with regards to this unique aspect of being a member of modern equity. Blackstone Commentaries on the Laws of England, Book 2, Chapter 1 of Property, in general, page number 1. There is nothing which so generally strikes the imagination and engages the affections of mankind as the right of property, or that sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world, in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. And yet there are very few that will give themselves the trouble to consider the original and foundation of this right. Pleased as we are with the possession, we seem afraid to look back to the means by which it was acquired, as if fearful of some defect in our title, or at best we rest satisfied with the decision of the laws in our favor, without examining the reason or authority upon which those laws have been built. We think it enough that our title is derived by the grant of the former proprietor, by descent from our ancestors, or by the last will and testament of the dying owner, not caring to reflect that, accurately and strictly speaking, there is no foundation in nature or in natural law why a set of words upon parchment should convey the dominion of land. Learning the history of tenure is important. You do not have to be a professional. A review of this era using recognized sources will make it fast and easy. One book I suggest is A Sketch of English Legal History by Maitland. This book contains a short review compared to most scholars, focusing on the important changes in the systems of law leading up to the English law till the year 1919, when modern law, created by constitutional governments, truly start to take shape. Here is a quote from A Sketch of English Legal History by Maitland showing the importance of what is called the old law in today's law of equity. Continuity of English law. Already, if we look back at the ages which are the most famous in the history of English legislation, the age of Bentham and the Radical Reform, the age which appropriated the gains that had been won but not secured under the rule of Cromwell, the age of Henry VIII, the age of Edward I, our English Justinian, it must seem to us that, for all their activity, they changed, and could change, but little in the great body of law which they had inherited from their predecessors. Hardly a rule remains unaltered, and yet the body of law that now lives among us is the same body that Blackstone described in the 18th century, Coke in the 17th, Littleton in the 15th, Bracton in the 13th, Glanville in the 12th. This continuity, this identity, is very real to us if we know that for the last 700 years all the judgments of the courts at Westminster have been recorded, and that for the most part they can still be read. Cote is famous in Canada for his work on the rules of reception. The rules of reception is the process that determines if a law of common law or other jurisdiction applies to the territory in question. This is a great quote that also shows the importance of learning the basics to English law till the year 1919. The Introduction of English Law into Alberta 1964 by Cote, page number 271. Our whole system of land tenure, for instance, depends upon feudal tenure and the statute quia emptors, while the statute of uses continues to have significance for real property law. Even though Henry VIII's motives for securing passage of the statute have been of merely academic concern for 300 years. Indeed, it is entirely possible that the whole motivation for the development of that most cherished institution, the trust, was tied up with the incidents of feudal tenure and the difficulties of livery of season. Yet would anyone dare to suggest that the trust or the fee simple was not received as part of the law of any Canadian common law province? Now let us get to the proof. The courts state what the social contract is, the same way the scholars do in books. Let's first look at how Canadian courts describe it, and then we will look at a couple of quotes from Blackstone. In Dodie, Wilt versus Jardine, 1836, to constitute a feoffment at common law. Or, by statute, no precise words are necessary. By the common law, a grantor might go upon land and express and declare the estate intended to be conveyed. This is describing the old rules of tenure before the Tenure Abolition Act 1660. And under the statute, it is only necessary that the intention of the parties should be expressed in writing. The Statute of Uses 1535 still applies today as the law of property. Then the question is whether this deed is a good charter of feoffment at common law. The material circumstance necessary in such an instrument is the declaration of the quantity and duration of the estate. Declaration of the quantity and duration of the estate is a key aspect to what is the social contract and how it is accepted, as we will see when we start to look at pre-English law till the year 1919. Here can be no doubt on this point. The habendum expresses that the grantees shall hold to them their heirs and assigns forever. The intention of the parties being clear, the deed, by the act of assembly, must take effect. The meaning of the words the habendum expresses that the grantees shall hold to them their heirs and assigns forever is the next factor that helps establish what is being discussed. This also helps us establish what the correct area of law is that shows us where the answers are. Let us now take a look back at the first quote from Blackstone with a quick review. What is the intention that all members are expressing? In other words, what do you want? Like Blackstone says, yet there are very few that will give themselves the trouble to consider the original and foundation of this right. These foundations are only found in specific eras in law as stated previously. Let us take a second look before we move on. There is nothing which so generally strikes the imagination and engages the affections of mankind as the right of property, or that sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world, in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. And yet there are very few that will give themselves the trouble to consider the original and foundation of this right. Pleased as we are with the possession, we seem afraid to look back to the means by which it was acquired. Now let us take a look at Commentaries on the Laws of England, William Blackstone, Book 2, Chapter 7 of Freehold Estates, of Inheritance. This will help us understand how the English system of law defines declaration of the quantity and duration of the estate. Before we get into the specifics of this chapter, I would like to stress that inheritance has nothing to do with the foundation of the social contract. The inheritance is how the members leave things they have a title to on their natural death. This is called an estate in remainder. These are equitable interests that fall under the law of property and are not the focus of this presentation. The first realization from this chapter is that ownership is not real ownership. Ownership is under a dominion interest of the Supreme Lord the King, as English law is a single ruler system. This required the system of English law to create a system of law based on land as dominion, where the people swore a duty to the monarchy to get lands as property. Where dominion in the system of law is a right to make law. Where the tenants are subject to the laws of the monarchy to make laws for the tenure, and the government to make laws for the citizen, where the tenant only has a property interest. As we go through this quote, we will discuss these aspects as they come. Tenant in fee simple, or, as he is frequently styled, tenant in fee, is he that has lands, tenements, or hereditaments, to hold to him and his heirs forever, generally, absolutely, and simply, without mentioning what heirs, but referring that to his own pleasure or to the disposition of the law. The true meaning of the word fee, feudum, is the same with that of feud or fief, and in its original sense it is taken in contradistinction to allodium. Blackstone is saying the true meaning of fee is the same as a feud, another word is tenure, which latter the writers on this subject define to be every man's own land, which he possesses merely in his own right, without owing any rent or service to any superior. This is property in its highest degree, and the owner thereof has absolutum et directum dominium, absolute and direct ownership, and therefore it is said to be seized thereof absolutely in dominico sua, in his own domain. Notice how Blackstone is referring to the property interest as a dominion interest, but not the dominion of anyone, the dominion of the tenant. A tenant is a member of common law. But feudum or fee is that which is held of some superior on condition or rendering him service, in which superior the ultimate property of the land resides. And therefore Sir Henry Spelman defines a feud or fee to be the right which the vassal or tenant has in lands, to use the same, and take the profits thereof to him and his heirs, rendering to the lord his due services. The mere allodial propriety of the soil always remaining in the lord. This allodial property no subject in England has, it being a received, and now undeniable, principle in the law, that all the lands in England are held mediately or immediately of the king. The king therefore only has absolutum et directum dominium, but all subjects' lands are in the nature of feudum or fee, whether derived to them by descent from their ancestors or purchased for a valuable consideration. For they cannot come to any man by either of those ways, unless accompanied with those feudal clogs, which were laid upon the first feudatory when it was originally granted. A subject therefore has only the usufruct, and not the absolute property of the soil, or, as Sir Edward Coke expresses it, he has dominium util, but not dominium directum. Notice how the monarchy holds the right to dominion. The tenant only gets a use of the lands as a property interest. Also pay close attention to whether derived to them by descent from their ancestors or purchased for a valuable consideration. These property and civil rights are legal rights, also known as equitable interests, to be able to purchase things subject to another and leave those things to an heir once the tenant dies. The biggest factor here is how it is derived. We will take a closer look at how each individual accepts or declares the estate. And hence it is that, in the most solemn acts of law, we express the strongest and highest estate that any subject can have, by these words: he is seized thereof in his domain as of fee. It is a man's domain, dominicum, or property, since it belongs to him and his heirs forever. Yet this dominicum, property, or domain is strictly not absolute or allodial, but qualified or feudal. It is his domain as of fee. That is, it is not purely and simply his own, since it is held of a superior lord, in whom the ultimate property resides. Notice the solemn act of declaring the estate is a substitution of dominion as of a fee, like a sale of rights, accepting an agreement that takes priority over one natural rights, creating the ability for the tenure, or as modern law calls it, the strict settlement not subject to a trust will take priority since one has declared the voluntary settlement. This is the primary sense and acceptation of the word fee. But, as Sir Martin Wright very justly observes, the doctrine that all lands are held, having been for so many ages a fixed and undeniable axiom, our English lawyers do very rarely, of late years especially, use the word fee in its primary original sense, in contradistinction to allodium or absolute property, with which they have no concern, but generally use it to express the continuance or quantity of estate. The lands are held in trust by the strict settlement, and the tenant only has use of those lands. The history of the fee as a dominion interest can be found in pre-English law, and the area of tenure only not in property law or civil law. If you would like more videos explaining these topics, please comment below letting me know. Once enough are interested, I can create these same types of presentations. Nothing fancy, of course, just basic info. A fee, therefore, in general, signifies an estate of inheritance, being the highest and most extensive interest that a man can have in a feud, and, when the term is used simply, without any other adjunct, or has the adjunct of simple annexed to it, as a fee or a fee simple, it is used in contradistinction to a fee conditional at the common law or a fee tail by the statute, importing an absolute inheritance, clear of any condition, limitation, or restrictions to particular heirs, but descendable to the heirs general, whether male or female, lineal or collateral. And in no other sense than this is the king said to be seized in fee, he being the feudatory of no man. What is the quantity and duration of the estate? Blackstone calls the estate, and estate in lands, tenements, and hereditaments, signifies such interest as the tenant has therein. It signifies the condition or circumstance in which the tenant stands with regard to his property. The tricky aspect to estates it is in three parts. First, with regard to the quantity of interest that the tenant has in the tenement, the quantity is the amount of property a tenant has. Secondly, with regard to the time at which that quantity of interest is to be enjoyed, this is a different aspect than the previous. The time which that quantity of interest a tenant has is found in the possession. Remainder and reversion aspects of the doctrine of estates found only in the common law or law of tenure. Third, with regard to the number and connections of the tenants. This aspect is based on the heirs the tenant has, how many children, etc., that can have a remainder interest in the estate for life of the tenant. Commentaries on the Laws of England, William Blackstone, Book 2, Chapter 7 of Freehold Estates. Of inheritance, the next objects of our disquisitions are the nature and properties of estates. An estate in lands, tenements, and hereditaments signifies such interest as the tenant has therein, so that if a man grants all his estate to another and his heirs, everything that he can possibly grant shall pass thereby. Point 1. It is called in Latin status, it signifying the condition or circumstance in which the owner stands with regard to his property. And, to ascertain this with proper precision and accuracy, estates may be considered in a threefold view. First, with regard to the quantity of interest which the tenant has in the tenement. Secondly, with regard to the time at which that quantity of interest is to be enjoyed. And, thirdly, with regard to the number and connections of the tenants. What is the time at which that quantity of interest of the estate is to be enjoyed? In other words, when is the estate in acceptance? For this, we will see what Blackstone has to say. Commentaries on the Laws of England, William Blackstone, Book 2, Chapter 11 of Estates in Possession, Remainder, and Reversion. We have considered estates solely with regard to their duration, or the quantity of interest which the owners have therein. We are now to consider them in another view, with regard to the time of their enjoyment, when the actual pernancy of the profits, that is, the taking, perception, or receipt of the rents and other advantages arising therefrom, begins. Estates, therefore, with respect to this consideration, may either be in possession or in expectancy, and of expectancies there are two sorts, one created by act of the parties, called a remainder, the other by act of law, and called a reversion. Of estates in possession, which are sometimes called estates executed, whereby a present interest passes to and resides in the tenant, not depending on any subsequent circumstance or contingency, as in the case of estates executory. There is little or nothing peculiar to be observed. All the estates we have hitherto spoken of are of this kind, for, in laying down general rules, we usually apply them to such estates as are then actually in the tenant's possession. But the doctrine of estates in expectancy contains some of the nicest and most abstruse learning in the English law. These will therefore require a minute discussion and demand some degree of attention. The estate in possession is the current interest a tenant has, creating the time being enjoyed is current. This means one is in acceptance of the estate as it is in possession. And estate in reversion is the residue of an estate left in the grantor. To commence in possession after the determination of some particular estate granted out by him. Point 40. Sir Edward Coke 41 describes a reversion to be the returning of land to the grantor or his heirs after the grant is over. As, if there be a gift entail, the reversion of the fee is, without any special reservation, vested in the donor by act of law, and so also the reversion, after an estate for life, years, or at will, continues in the lessor. For the fee simple of all lands must abide somewhere, and if he, who is before possessed of the whole, carves out of it any smaller estate, and grants it away, whatever is not so granted remains in him. A reversion is therefore never created by deed or writing, but arises from construction of law. A remainder can never be limited, unless by either deed or devise. But both are equally transferable when actually vested, being both estates in presenti. Though taking effect in futuro. The estate in reversion is the time of enjoyment terminating. This can simply be said as the removal of the subsequent settlement subject to a trust, creating the ability to terminate the settlement not subject to a trust as the membership agreement to join English law. What does this mean in simple terms? The acceptance of the agreement as an estate that took priority no longer exists, removes the membership and dominion of the English law, which returns you to your ancient rights, since within the sphere of English law. No tenant has these ancient natural rights since property and civil rights take priority based on a current valid agreement. My research and the history of the English law state that the strict settlement did not occur till after 1688 and was not finalized and settled until 1925, when the law of property was created to take jurisdiction over property interest. This created a situation that since 1925 only the Settled Land Act deals with settlements not subject to a trust, and the law of property deals with settlements subject to a trust. Before the law of property, the Settled Land Act dealt with all land disputes, where the Statute of Uses 1535 deals with the declaration of the estate, giving more powers of ownership and civil rights to the tenant that used to be a serf. Understanding the truth of ownership within equity gives the ability to recognize that the tenant, by the purchase of the land, or being a resident, or using the laws of the system as your own, creates a declaration of a trust. The monarchy is not the owner of the lands held by the settlement. The monarchy is the trustee. When a tenant purchases lands as property, the fee simple title that can only come with land also conveys the duties of trustee to those lands in Trust La Rochelle v. Soucy Estate. In contrast, these additional steps of transfer are unnecessary if the trust is constituted by declaration. That is, if the owner of the subject matter decides to simply declare herself a trustee of the property. Waters' Law of Trust says the following regarding this mode of transfer at 184 to 185. Alternatively, the owner may decide to declare himself a trustee of the property. In this case, title remains in his hands. No conveyance, delivery, assignment, or statutory transfer is required, but thereafter the owner is divested of title and equity in favor of his beneficiary. The owner has changed his hats, so to speak. He takes off the hat of owner and puts on the hat of trustee, and equity holds him to that change of hats. He can no longer claim to have a beneficial interest in that to which he still retains title. Choosing property and civil rights as part of an estate is the acceptance of the membership of English law and equity. This choice creates the declaration as acceptance, and once accepted, the English law takes priority until both settlements are removed. That is the social contract. Declaring the estate is also declaring being under the strict settlement. This does not take away natural rights. The settlement simply takes priority. They apply first, you can say. Only once the settlements are removed can one be considered to be no longer under the jurisdiction of common law and equity. The rules for estates are complicated. To put all the pieces together, there is not enough time to get into how the estate or membership is determined. That is for another day. The object is to show what the social contract is, with some basics to establish the legitimacy of the information presented. The basics become easy once we find the starting point. The starting point is before English law. Once this is realized, learning becomes easier, leading you to the answers you have. The rules of jurisdiction change drastically once one is not a member. The rules of jurisdiction most are familiar with have the assumption you are a member and reside within the dominion of another. I hope I have tried to show what the social contract is simply. I also hope that most can start to understand what the system of equity truly is, and most of all, that the truth to equity can only be found by tracing the rights and interests to this system of law from pre-1066 to today. If there is enough interest by having 1,500 YouTube subscribers at Equity Exposed, I will create 3 easy steps to assist in learning. 1. History, 2. Structure, 3. Procedures. These will be short videos with commentary streamlining the information. In the video comments, you will find links to the sources and additional material for those wanting to look deeper into each topic themselves. History of Tenure, 600 to 1919, by Maitland and Jenks, and Modern Equity, 1920, today. Structure, Blackstone Commentaries on the Laws of England. Specific procedures to rules and doctrines applicable today. Law reviews, case law, commentaries, etc.